Version of Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting underway. Welcome everybody, welcome TAAC members. I'll start with a roll call of folks that I see have joined us. If I do not call your name, please let me know so I can have you on my little sheet here as attending. I will start, all right, Diane.
Good afternoon, Diane Graham-Rash for Trellis.
Thank you. Eric.
Here, Minnesota Council on Disability.
John.
Here, precinct, I think 13 or what, section 13 or whatever. 8, rather. I should remember.
Claudia.
Claudia Dooley, MNCCD.
Patty.
Patty Thorson, Trellis.
Darrell.
Darrell Paulsen. I'm on, I think, Region F, I think, but I'm also the vice chair.
Gary. You are muted, Carrie.
Hi, Sarah Sheldon, Precinct G.
Thank you, Carrie. Richard.
Richard Rowan here, AARP.
All right, and are there any TAAC members on in the meeting that I did not recognize? I see 2 phone numbers.
I'm on there, David. Jeff Daines, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jeff. You're
okay.
you're the phone
Jeff
number
Daines,
ending in 29?
Yep. Jeff Daines, Precinct D.
Okay, perfect. And then I see another phone number, 612 number ending in 49.
Hello, David. Chris Bates, Precinct B.
Chris, well, we definitely have a quorum. All right. Again, David Fenley. I am the chair of TAAC. Thank you all for joining us. Let's start with our regular business. You all have the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve it.
Move to approve the agenda, Jeff Daines.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second?
Claudia, second.
All right, I'll take Claudia's second just because I heard that first, but it sounded like somebody else wanted to jump in. All right, if you approve, say yes. If you do not approve, say no. Diane.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Claudia.
Yes.
Patty.
Yes.
Darrell.
Aye.
Gary.
Yes.
Richard.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
And Chris.
Yes.
Fantastic. And yes, for myself as well. I always tend to forget that. Alrighty, you also received the minutes from May. If there are no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month.
So moved, David.
Thank you, Chris. For moving, is there a second?
Patty Thorson, second. Okay.
I think I got Darrell first.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being so enthusiastic about it, about seconding. I will run through the roll call. Diane.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Claudia.
Yes.
Patty.
Yes.
Darrell.
Aye.
Carrie.
Yes.
Richard.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
And myself, I vote yes as well. We are getting good at this. It only took us 5 minutes to do all of that. Did any members join that I need to know about? It doesn't look like it. I saw a couple people join. I don't want to miss anyone. So TAAC members that joined. Perfect. All right, let's roll right into presentation. We've heard from, I think it's probably been about a year on fare collection equipment, maybe a little bit longer. But we have an update from Nick, Bob, and Robert on ADA fare collection equipment. Take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. All right. My name is Nick Eull, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about some fare collection equipment, an accessibility overview of maybe some of the more recent stuff we've done. Dennis Dworshak was planning on leading this, but he ran into a conflict, and so I'm excited to be here in his place today. I'm the Senior Manager of Revenue Collections at Metrotransit, so my team works very closely with the fare collection equipment on light rail, on our buses, and really anything that allows a customer to pay. Next screen, or sorry, this is the first time I've done this. Okay, so I've got a couple experts in the house today. Bob Cassidy is our Supervisor of Equipment, Electronic Revenue Equipment Repair on the fare box side of things, the bus side of things. And he's going to provide an overview of some exciting stuff that we've had with our bus fare boxes over the last couple of years, as well as talk about our mobile validators, which are the devices that accept go-to-card payments. And after Bob Cassidy, we have Bob Peterson, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the technology that we have on our transit platforms, which include both our light rail platforms, as well as, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, as we've rolled out bus rapid transit with the A line and the C line, and some of the upcoming lines, such as the Orange line and the D line, some of the equipment and technology that we have on those platforms that make it easy for customers to pay. And we'll also talk about the station validators as well. So without further ado, let's move to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Bob Cassidy.
Good afternoon, Chair Fenley and committee. My name is Bob Cassidy, and as Nick said, I am the fare collection supervisor for the fare box side of our fare collections. I would like to give you a brief overview of our fare collection equipment that is currently being used. We have currently two types of fare boxes on our buses. One that's much older, and that's why we're replacing them with the new style. Both of them currently accept cash, coupons, tokens, everything that the old one accepted, the new one is currently accepting as well. We're phasing out the older style of the fare box, replacing them with the new version on a gradual implementation as our budget allows us to do so. We anticipate the next 5 to 7 years for the completion of that changeover. We currently have the new style fare box on 170 buses. We plan on procuring another 100 of those devices this year, so by the end of the year, we'll have 270 of them installed. We reviewed the new style fare box with the TAAC Committee back in September of 2018. As well as shortly after that, Dennis Dworshak and I attended the chapter meeting for the National Federation of the Blind to demonstrate it there, and it was very well received by all the attendees of the meeting. The next slide, please. Here is the go-to reader on our buses. We've had this in place for about 5 years now. We replaced the older blue football-looking device because that aged out of service and we could no longer get parts to keep it operating. We really strive to mount this device in the same similar location no matter what bus type we have so that it's easy to find and use. It utilizes lights, tones, and different colored screens to denote the different results of tagging a card. We did have some issues at the beginning with a few devices having a low volume, but we found a replacement speaker to put in there and we got them all at a consistent volume range. We also had some feedback that it was tough to distinguish between a low value chime on the device, so we had that particular tone modified to make it easier for customers to realize when they had low value on their cards. These devices have proven to be very reliable, and we do not have any current plan to replace them at this time. And at that, I will pass it over to Robert Peterson in the next slide. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Finley and all TAAC members. Again, I am Bob Peterson, and I work on the rail side, light rail, and BRT. Currently on the rail, we have the cubic ticket vending machines. They're full service, which do give out change. They're for higher volume capacity. They have audio language, which is accessible with headphones, and it has a speaker. The validators are the same validators we've had for the last 10, 12 years, but they've been upgraded, and we are now in the process of upgrading them again to Windows 10. So we're just getting the parts into that, which gives us much more flexibility, more audio capability with that. And so far, the older versions have been extremely reliable. We've got very few problems with those. Next slide, please. Now for the new bus rapid transit, this particular for the Orange Line and the D line, which is coming up next year, we're using the Flowbird ticket vending machines. Flowbird is a replacement for the Parcan that we have currently on the A and C line. It has the same small footprint as those machines, which is much smaller than the cubic TVMs, has faster transactions. And we use these for the lower volume stations and the BRT locations. The only thing with these is their exact change only are credit card. The audio has been improved. It's got a headset with speaker with volume control. And we currently have language, text, and audio, which is English and Spanish. And future, which Flowbird is working on right now, is Vietnamese, Somali, Karen, and Hmong, which should be out hopefully by the time the Orange Line opens. Said again, that is currently, they're working on that, and they're telling us that we'll be ready by then. So we really like these. They've got a bigger screen. I don't know if you can tell in that picture, but they've got a bigger display screen. The audio is much louder than on the current ones. Next slide.
Yeah,
Sweet,
and
then
so
I'm
just
done.
to kind of reinforce some of the things that both Bob Cassidy and Bob Peterson have talked about, as we've either upgraded our fare collection equipment or as we've acquired new technology or new capabilities for fare collection equipment, our team is very, very aware of the minimum standards, as we like to call them, from an ADA design perspective, whether it be device location, the height, either the height of the machines or the height of the control mechanisms, where Braille is required, where we're required to provide audio for sight impaired customers. I think between the relationships that we have with the vendors that provide this equipment and our own awareness in terms of conversations with the FTA or some of our peers across transit, we've always seen those as the minimum requirements. And I think as you listen to Bob Cassidy talk about some of the conversations that we've had with the National Federation of the Blind over the last few years to bring actual users in to use our equipment and to make sure again that not only does it meet the requirements of ADA, but is it usable, and how can we improve on those requirements to increase the usability? Or through engaging directly with some of the disabled individuals in the community that use transit and have had run into challenges. There's been a number of one-on-one conversations and exploration that we've done with those folks to try and make our equipment more usable and just more user friendly. And so I think as you've listened to this presentation over the last 5 or 10 minutes, hopefully you see that the TAAC has always been a very important part of that team as well. And we continue to look forward to the cooperation that we have, not just with this team, but with the rest of the community to make our fare payment system accessible to everyone. So with that, Chair Finley and committee members will take any questions you may have.
Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Darrell.
With the new ticket vending machines and the footprint being the same, and we're not losing any of the features, but one of the features we are losing that I heard you say, and we haven't gone back over it, is that machine only allows for exact change. So are we going to lose any revenue because of that, or are we going to possibly have some fare evasions because folks don't have the exact change and they're not gonna want to give up $10 or a $20 bill for a $2 or $3 ride.
Chair Finley, committee members, you are correct that the machines are exact change only. And this, even though the machine is going to be different for the orange line and the D line, that policy has been in place since we launched the A line in 2016. So both the older style machines that we have on A line and C line, as well as the newer style machines that we'll be installing later this year, are consistent with that policy of not issue or exact change only, not providing change. And so while we know that does provide some inconvenience to our customers, we do allow for using credit cards, or we do encourage customers to use go-to cards. As to whether there may be fare evasion as a result of that, we understand that there is some inconvenience to customers, and so I can't speak to the exact amount of fare evasion that we may be incurring as a result of that. But I do know that our officers are out there inspecting fares and are taking all circumstances into consideration, I believe, whether they choose to cite somebody for fare evasion or not. So I really can't speak to whether we're losing revenue as a result of that, and I certainly don't have any figures. So your point is noted. The balance there is that it's very costly for us to issue change.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to refill those tubes and things like that. So that's the balance that we've tried to strike with that policy.
Thank you.
Chair, can I speak? This is Heidi.
Go ahead, Heidi. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. I have a question because when you talk about you educated and ask the disabled the people with disabilities in the community, were they all physical disabilities or did they have multiple disability processing problems? Did you bring a wide variety? Because when I go to that machine, my brain has to figure out how to process each little part of it. Yes, I have a physical disability and I don't see well or walk well, but mine is how my brain processes. And when the green line first came out, I had to learn how to navigate to get the discount, because I was more than qualified. And then we finally got an L put on my a limited mobility thing put on my card. But there were some screw ups and I go through the county and the county was saying I was double dipping. So is this processing easy to follow or is it complicated if I use the new technology that you're putting into place? Because I'm concerned about the people in the community that have brain injury and can't process very well, but might have other physical disabilities or other kinds of disabilities too, because I don't want to leave that out because they could get mad at me. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, it's a great question. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of our focus around trying to improve the functionality of the machine and make it as user-friendly as possible has been with groups like the National Federation of the Blind, and probably more so on the sight impaired, with sight impaired customers more so than some of our other customers. But that said, we've tried to simplify the process to purchase a ticket as much as we can. And in fact, when we go back to where we started on the A line almost 5 years ago, what that process was, or that screen flow, if you would, which buttons you press when to both initiate and complete the transaction, we've changed that many times based on all kinds of customer feedback. And so, committee member, while I can't say that we've directly engaged, for instance, individuals that may, need more time to process that ticket flow, I can say that it's an iterative process, and anytime we get feedback and have an opportunity to improve that and make it easier for everyone, we try and accomplish that.
This is David. I have a follow-up. How are there major changes in the process for paying fare or for purchasing tickets with the new machines, or is it generally the same, more streamlined? Will people have to learn an entire new way to purchase tickets and pay fare?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it's a good question. Generally speaking, the technology is maybe a little bit different. The buttons might be in different places. The screen design, what's on the screen may be different, but the process is still really the same as much as it can be between all of our machines. When you approach the machine, most of the time you're able to push one button and then pay for your fare based off the type of transaction that you're purchasing, especially for single-use tickets. If somebody were traveling to, say, like a Twins baseball game, or had, you know, unique circumstances around the number of tickets they wanted to purchase, in those situations, there's, you know, maybe a few more button pushes that'll happen. But for the vast majority of our customers, I would say 90% plus, it's you know, one screen to choose your ticket, the next screen to identify how you want to pay for that ticket, and then the actual payment. So it's pretty straightforward across all of our platforms. We tried to make it as much the same as we can, whether it's one of our full-scale ticket vending machines on the light rail line, or one of the vending machines as part of our C line, or the upcoming orange line.
This is David. I have one more follow-up, and then I'll come to you, John. Okay, and then to you, Richard. How long does Metrotransit foresee having more than one style of these in operation?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's a good question. I think we plan on, I don't know that there's a time period for that. I think there's an indefinite time period. And just to provide the reasoning for that, when we purchase a vending machine that we use on our light rail line, just based on some of the circumstances of that line, those vending machines are about $80,000, and we really, you know, factor a lot of use on those machines, a high transaction volume. From some of our stations on, say, like the A line or the C line, where somebody might interact with that machine 4 or 5 times a day, or sometimes even less infrequent than that, the vending machines that we're purchasing for that line are, you know, considerably cheaper, somewhere in the range of about $10,000 to $12,000 based off the volume. And sometimes if we were to look at purchasing the same vending machine, say that $80,000 machine across some of our new lines, it's not financially feasible that we can, you know, acquire that technology and still have the funds necessary to build the rest of the line. So, you know, as much as it's a challenge for both our customers and internally to have different vintages of the machines, we're trying to balance out really where the machine fits into the overall service and making those decisions on which one we're useful for which expansion line, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
With the cost, with technology advancing exponentially, and the cost of technology radically declining, what is the overall fiscal impact, and what you anticipate? And then I have one other question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, I'll try and take that question. While technology does seem to be advancing, I think a lot of the components in the ticket vending machines really we haven't seen significant price decreases. We've seen some additional capabilities on the machines in terms of brighter and bigger screens, maybe a little bit more faster processing power when you press a button, as an example, or when you insert your credit card to pay a fare. Those things happen sooner. But a lot of the components inside the machines, in terms of, say, like the motherboards or the monitors or some of the components that accept and process change, we haven't really seen a significant decrease in those, to the point that our machines aren't necessarily getting any cheaper. They're not getting considerably more expensive. Those prices probably increase at the rate of inflation instead of you know, significantly jumping. But we're not really recognizing any appreciable savings. What we are trying to figure out is, where does mobile play in this, both now and in the future? And I know mobile's not a great fit for everyone, and there's some challenges. You know, I understand with those that may be, you know, sight impaired or otherwise. But that's an opportunity that we're trying to figure out how it fits in as that advances and becomes a little bit more user friendly in the years ahead.
This seems almost scientific. I mean, almost science fiction, but one could almost see facial recognition making. I'm not saying I support that, but you know, that. And the other thing I just wanted to note is, I hear all this talk about the A line, and I'm kind of wondering if you're discriminating against the people who take the A train. That's my attempt at humor.
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay.
To Harlem. Okay. Anyway.
Thank you, John.
What?
Thanks, John.
That's the end. I will say nothing more the rest of the meeting.
That we don't want that. And what makes you think they're all being tracked by facial recognition already by Big Brother, John? You know?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just looking around the room here, I think it's coming through the line here.
Okay.
As it is for everyone.
Richard, go ahead. You had a question.
Sure. I just more of a comment, I guess. Following on what Heidi said, of course, we also represent the senior population, and sometimes some senior members of our population have difficulty with technology. So I would just hope that you're also including them when you evaluate the ease of use and simplicity for the sake of that population.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, we do the best we can in that, and I think a couple things we do are, one, as I mentioned earlier, we try and make that process as streamlined as possible so that there's not a lot of logic that necessarily goes into it. When you approach the machine, if you're a senior and you qualify for one of our discounted fares during, you know, the time of day when one is eligible for those, we like to make that a one-ticket purchase. In addition to that, as I mentioned, any time that a customer identifies that that process is maybe cumbersome or could be improved and they're willing to provide us feedback, we do take that very seriously and into account, sometimes to the point where one customer over a year may provide us feedback on something that could be improved, and there's not a specific volume of either complaints or suggestions that need to come in. We just take each one individually to see if we can make an incremental improvement through the process as a result of that feedback, and we try and incorporate it. So I think we have a well-rounded process that maybe doesn't catch everything up front. We do the best we can, but as we get that feedback, we really try and incorporate it, and you know, every step of the way is an improvement, hopefully. Sometimes a big one, sometimes a little one.
This may be off topic, but with more things being done remotely, and it's revitalized my life. Zoom. Are there any projections as to ridership among the general population and then among the population with disabilities?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee members, from an overall ridership standpoint, since the pandemic started, or at least a couple months after that, at least Metro Transit ridership has been down, I'd say probably about 60% on average, and that's across all of our lines. Some are affected more than others, say like North Star, and some are affected less than others, say like Sea Line as an example. From a projection standpoint, you know, there's a danger in projections anytime, but especially in this situation related to COVID, where much of our ridership was based off daily commuters or weekday commuters from their home in the suburbs to downtown Minneapolis. And so while I don't know that we've made any projections, we are really watching for third and fourth quarter of this year to see both how companies start to come back to work, hopefully in the downtown areas, as well as the universities. You know, the University of Minnesota, I think, has been distant learning for a long time, and they have plans to come back in the fall, and they're a big source of our ridership. So while I can't, you know, predict with any amount of reliability what those numbers are going to be, we're certainly trying to position ourselves, one, to be ready for it, and two, to once again be that preferred mode of transit to either your school or your workplace or wherever you need to go, a Twins game, groceries, a medical appointment. In terms of projections around disabled customers, committee member, I really don't have any information that I'm able to share with you in terms of what our projections are.
That would be very interesting to look into. I'd be very interested in that because I rather enjoy staying at home for the most part.
Claudia, go ahead.
Just a real quick question. Do you have, with the new machines coming in, the fare boxes, what will you be doing in case the fare boxes break down?
Mr. Chair, committee member, it's very similar to what we do now. We've got a couple different teams that we have work on that. One is each bus is assigned to an operating garage, and we have 5 operating garages throughout the Twin Cities. And we have a team of technicians that are staffed at those garages so that if that bus comes in and there's a malfunction that's reported by the operator or some other way, we fix that on site right away before that bus pulls out. So hopefully every time a bus is pulling out, that fare box is working fine. And then in addition to that, they have some preventive maintenance responsibilities, much like a car. Every 6 months, you know, a fare box needs new belts and rollers and things like that. So there's ongoing maintenance. If something were to happen when that fare box is out on the street, say that bus pulls out, the fare box was working fine, and somehow it gets jammed, we have a fleet of mobile technicians that, depending on where that bus is at in its trip, let's just say that bus gets out there 5 minutes into an 8-hour trip, it gets jammed. We'll actually send a technician out on the road to meet that bus at one of its layovers to repair that bus on site. So a couple different things that we do there to repair it, but also an ongoing maintenance plan that so that hopefully we don't run into that issue very often.
Thank
This
you.
this is David. Do any other TAC members have questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Heidi, Chair. I
ahead,
have a
Mary.
question. Are you going to do any videos or training? Because it's just like when we were talking about cross the lights, you know, and how to cross safely. And I thought about this with the last meeting, and I get every kind of crossing, and now I have to learn every kind of fare thing, you know, if I take the train or the bus or whatever. Are you going to have videos or anything that kind of teaches? Because we all come in different ways of learning. So what you think is appropriate might not be appropriate for me, and I'm still confused in how the machine still works. And I want to be as independent as much as I can, but I'm probably still going to need help, you know, here and there. But are you going to put any videos up on the screen so you can help us?
Mr. Chair, committee member, I know we have done some videos, but I will say that the majority of our training, at least on the fare box side of things, for example, has been aimed at the bus operator, because the bus has a unique advantage over light rail or A line in the sense of anytime a customer boards a bus, especially on fixed route or at least on fixed route, that operator should be there and should be well informed so that a customer like you who has challenges, he or she can walk you through that process. In terms of providing videos, say on how to pay during light rail, or if riding on A line or with one of our machines on the upcoming Orange line, for example, I don't know if we even have video training on the list of things to work on, but I think that's a great recommendation, and I can
Very
certainly
good.
talk with my staff to see if that's something we can put together and make accessible, say through our website or some other means.
I would,
I think that would really help, because there are people who are always going to need to go back to that once in a while to train themselves. Because I don't know what the future of everybody's going to be like. And then there's many options that we can have, or at least out in the community. I don't know if you can put like a simple little ABC learning thing, because they might not have all this technology, but they still want to ride the bus or the trains and be a part of the community. So think of not just videos, but that's one start, but all the options you can think of that can make it easy for the person to get to A to B. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for that feedback. I've certainly documented that, and we'll talk through how we can be more effective there.
Go ahead, John.
really briefly, I'm thinking about paratransit and metro mobility, and I know they have fare boxes. I actually recall a time when fare boxes malfunction and people got to ride for free. But is there anything new in terms of fare boxes for metro?
Metro mobility?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee members, I don't think there's been any talk about putting fare boxes on the metro mobility vehicles.
There was some sort of device that took. Maybe no, they took. No, I gotta be stupid. I misspoke. I misthought because they read tickets. I mean, or something. And
Mr. Chair, committee member, we have go-to card readers on the vehicles.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
But he is, this is Heidi, but he is right about metro mobility, that the same machine that you used on the city bus is the same one they use on Metro Mobility. And the Metro Mobility has malfunctioned. I've literally seen them reactivate it. I've seen it where I haven't paid. So because I get my money through human services through Dakota County. So every time that thing malfunction, it looks like I'm not using my fare. So they look at that, you know, but we've had a number of times over the years that it has failed, you know, and more than the city bus, I would have to say. I don't know what's the difference between Metro Mobility and the city buses, because I pay more on the city buses, you know, than I do on the Metro Mobility side. So it's something you guys might want to think about, you know, talking to Metro Mobility or figuring out when you're getting these new machines if they're going to be the same.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, I can comment on that for 1 minute. You are right that we have seen a higher rate of failure on the devices that are on the Metro Mobility buses than the fixed route buses. And there's a couple things that contribute to that, which I won't get in here, but there's some unique circumstances for Metro Mobility compared to fixed route. And so one of the things that we've done over the last year or so, and maybe a little bit longer, is in partnering with the folks in Metro Mobility, we've hired a dedicated staff that's overseen by the Microtransit staff, in fact, the supervisors that were on this call earlier today, so that we can go out and we can repair those rather than relying on the contractors to repair those vehicles who maybe don't have that specific set of knowledge and experience to be most effective in repairing those. We actually have some dedicated resources now within Microtransit that we partner with Metro Mobility to do that. And so while we haven't eliminated all of the failures, I'm sure as you may recognize over the last year or so, in our tracking of maintenance and failure data, we have seen a significant improvement in the reliability of those machines compared to maybe where they were 3 or 4 years ago. And that's resulted in higher revenue, higher fare collection, as well as just a better experience for customers. So we are aware of that, and I appreciate that, but we're
my free ride from like
Hold on, John.
Hastings. I'm sorry.
Hold on. Let him finish, please.
I don't need that.
I'm good.
Enough. But there's free rides given. So, I mean, one could say, I hope they don't get those problems fixed, but that's, that would make me very angry because we need to pay our fair share.
No more free rides for you, John.
Okay. It's not even from Stillwater or to Minneapolis.
Are there any more questions or comments
I
from TAC
had a
members?
follow-up question, and that has to do with why is Metro Mobility having more problems than the city bus with the same machine? If they're the same machine, they should be acting like almost identical, you know? So that if the city buses are having like great results, I don't understand why Metro Mobility would have a lot of problems. Is it because of how you're maintaining it? Is it how the drivers are not maintaining it or doing something to it? What is causing it more on the metro side than not on the city buses?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee member, a couple things that I'll speak to at a high level anyway without getting too far into the weeds are, so first of all, in the city bus, the go-to card reader interfaces with our AVL system, our trapeze system. And it just provides a smoother interface there in terms of the driver being able to log on and change fares and make changes there. With the Metro Mobility one, since there isn't an interface, the driver has to use a card to log on, and it's just not as smooth of a transition in some cases. Right. Another thing is that when a bus pulls in, when a fixed route bus pulls into an operating garage, it's using Wi-Fi to communicate, whereas for the Metro Mobility buses, we have a cellular data connection in those devices that uses, say, like a Verizon connection, a cellular connection to exchange data back and forth versus having Wi-Fi. And sometimes that cellular exchange, a lot of times, doesn't go as smoothly as something that happens when a bus pulls into the garage because there's dead spots or there's breaks and interruption and things like that. And so the other thing, too, is where I mentioned we had a dedicated staff at each garage that would repair these devices. Unfortunately, some of the contractors that help with the Metro Mobility service don't have that same level of expertise and those dedicated resources. And that's where I spoke of a couple minutes ago. We've tried to supplement that by having some of our own staff who have that expertise help out. And so those are just some of the things that contribute to maybe a little bit more challenging operating environment for those vehicles than what we have on fixed route.
I just figured that as second-class citizens, we got the handicap on fare boxes. Super. Okay.
Thank you, Nick,
Yeah.
and Heidi and John. We still have a couple more minutes on the agenda for this, so if there are one or two more questions from TAC members, by all means. All right, well, Nick, Bob, thank you very much. I do want to commend you on a very concise and targeted presentation, which allowed for a more robust discussion. That's what we want here. I know that some presentations are more complicated than others, but it is nice to have the presenters come with just information that we need and then allow for a nice discussion, because I think that's really where our programs. Hold on, John. Hold on. That's really where I think a lot of the good information comes out of, is when TAC members start to talk about their experience and what they know. Go ahead, John.
First, when you said you were excited to come, I kind of yawned and laughed, but now I find it exciting because you really are on top of things in a broad sense.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and thank you for the opportunity. And we've got some notes that I'll take back to the team that we'll get working on. But really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is Heidi, Chair. I just want to say one thing. Just make sure that when you put all these new machines in, and you were talking about different sounds, making sure that they're loud enough and they're consistent across the board. Because when I use crosswalks, I've been noticing this, because TAC has been, Ken has been really waking my eyes open to certain things, and it's like, and Ken is blind, and so he hears it in all different ways, where I have to hear it and see it to order to process it. So make sure that seeing it and hearing it all kind of work together as a team, and you keep it consistent with the volumes and stuff, and not make it so complicated that we can't figure out anything. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, committee member, we've spent a lot of money over the last few years replacing speakers because things aren't loud enough. So it's very important to us, and we'll make sure that we continue that.
All right. Well, that was a great discussion, a great presentation. Again, thank you, Nick, Bob, and Bob. We are right on schedule. Moving on to Microtransit. I see Meredith is here. Take it away, Meredith. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So good afternoon. My name is Meredith Klekotka. I am the Shared Mobility Program Manager for Metrotransit, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here today to talk to you about a pilot project that we're doing in North Minneapolis that we are anticipating a launch early next year in the spring of 2022. Next slide, please. Before I jump into the microtransit pilot, which I would love to have a really similar, robust discussion like you just had, where you all are providing some feedback on as we're going through planning, I want to give some overall context for shared mobility and Metrotransit's approach to shared mobility. For those of you that aren't familiar with that term, shared mobility is transportation services that are shared amongst users. So technically transit falls in this category, but I'll give a couple other examples like Uber or Lyft. If you've taken their shared ride services, Lyft Line or Uber Pool, those are some examples of shared mobility. Also the bike share systems. So locally we have Nice Ride. And the scooters that you see out on the street, so the shared scooters that Minneapolis and St. Paul have both deployed are some examples. Next slide, please. So I just pulled some graphics from a regional plan just to provide some context of this work that Metrotransit is doing in shared mobility is happening in a regional context. And the biggest action regionally that was taken on shared mobility was an action plan that was created in 2018. So you see the cover of it there on the right. It was setting goals and next steps to advance shared mobility in the Twin Cities region. It was funded through the McKnight Foundation. It really provided a jumping off point to start discussions around shared mobility. It involved a lot of stakeholders, and the outcomes of it were the two goals that you see in the graphic there on the left. So goal 1 was shifting households away from single occupancy vehicles towards transit and shared mobility as the region grows, with a specific goal to get 50,000 cars off the road over the next 10 years, so by 2028. And then the second goal was really focused on equity, so ensuring that shared mobility programs are adapted to serve the same user base that makes up public transportation. So to make sure it's accessible, that it works for everybody. And I think the results of this that I just wanted to share in context was, this is not work that happens in one agency. So while I'm with Metro Transit, there are a lot of people working on shared mobility programs across the region. And go ahead to the next slide. We do have a local implementation collaborative. So this is the Twin Cities Shared Mobility Collaborative. Its mission is really implementation of that action plan that you just saw. So we're trying to foster collaboration among government and nonprofit and private sector to expand and improve these multimodal options and shared mobility options. And I wanted to share specifically because we actually have openings on the steering committee right now. So that closes June 10th. You can apply at tcsharedmobility.org, that link there. We do lots of activities. We are funded through the McKnight, and it's run, administered through the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies. So we do quarterly convenings where we bring in new vendors to talk about new transportation technologies or products. So it's a very robust group there. And on the right, you see some of the active steering committee members. So we have government entities and research entities and advocacy folks that all join us at the table. So go ahead to the next slide.
This is David. Meredith, can I ask a quick clarification question? Is there a spot specifically for the disability community on the steering committee?
We reserve 20% of the seats, whether they're filled or not filled, for members representing underrepresented groups, so low income, communities of color. So I think that would be in that category. So we have, I'd have to look at how many openings we have exactly. Right now we have 7 openings.
Thank you. Thank you. Disability tends to be an afterthought on the diversity list. So just a reminder there, just to let you know.
Yep,
Chair,
no,
can I say, Chair, can I say something with that question you asked?
Please wait. Hold
How
on,
is
please.
it written?
Heidi, hold on, please. Hold on, please, Heidi. This is David. I realize the Pandora's box that I might have been opening by asking a question mid presentation. I just wanted to clarify if there was a spot. So I want to keep content related questions for after the presentation, but if you want to ask a question to clarify something in the presentation at the moment in time, by all means, but I definitely don't want to get sidetracked with a full-on discussion.
No, this goes with your question.
With that being said, go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, this goes with your question. How is it written, you know, in your program so the disabled community can be a part of it? Because if it's written in a way that it's in like a pile of, there, you might have more low income people, you might have more of these people, and then the disabled, because I've noticed that the disabled get left out a lot more than other sections. So Dave is right. About asking the question, and we should go back and look at that to see how it's written and see if we are even remotely in there enough to even get our voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I will go ahead and make sure we take a look at our governance doc. We are a very small organization that is volunteer based, so we just wrote our governing information just recently. So we always have the ability to shift or to change things and put that through to vote. So happy to take a look, and I made a note there. So on the shared mobility side of what we're doing at Metro Transit, I've been with the organization about 2 years. In that time, we've developed strategies for how we're approaching shared mobility. And we decided this overall program goal of enabling people to travel without the need of a personal automobile. Slightly different from our, function as a transit agency, but still equally important in providing people with a car-free trip. So we had lots of strategies, and it essentially boiled down to how do we leverage these new shared mobility services and concepts? Do we provide some of these services, and how do we connect to them? Go ahead with the next slide. Thank you. So from about 30 strategies, we narrowed it down for these 7 kind of top tier strategies. And this is looking at about a 3 to 5 year implementation. And so the first one that you'll see on there is the implementation of a microtransit pilot. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. There are a number of other things. I just put them up there for reference that you're welcome to read through at a later time. But really what we're working on this year is implementation of a microtransit pilot and investment in mobility hubs. Go ahead to next slide. I wanted to provide some context for how we're investing in those 7 first moves that you just saw on the last slide. And so we've decided the investment priorities for shared mobility for Metro Transit are in areas close to or connected to high-level transit service. So that first bullet point, integrating with other providers in a kind of 0 to 2 mile service area outside of those high frequency lines. Think the bus rapid transit lines or train service. Second is increasing mobility choices. This is really at the heart of shared mobility. How do we provide better choices for especially low-income areas, communities of color, people living with disabilities, and in those low-density, high-needs area that might not have high-frequency transit service. And then the last one is really looking at transit-oriented development investments. So where are we already putting investment into transit or transit-related development where we can really get more bang for our buck and really ensure that people can travel car-free in those areas by, providing additional bike parking or car share parking, et cetera. Go ahead to the next slide. So these are 2 images of the microtransit service, just in other cities, kind of how the vehicles look, how people start to access it. The one on the right is a service in St. Louis. The one on the left is one in Sacramento with the wheelchair lift deployed. We are looking specifically at a very tight service area in North Minneapolis. For those of you that aren't familiar or that are familiar with microtransit, go ahead to the next slide. Microtransit is demand responsive transit. So it's not like a traditional fixed route bus. You actually call it on your phone, or you can call in to a call-in number for your pickup location. So it is more demand responsive, and it operates more like an Uber or a Lyft, but they are shared rides. So the vehicles are able to accommodate multi-passengers. The amount of passengers per hour kind of ranges across the country, but tends to be in the 3 to 5 passenger per hour range. They are enabled by technology that's managed by a private entity. So transit agencies bring in a microtransit software vendor, either put that software on their vehicles, or they sub out all of the operations. And they get the vehicles and the operators and the software from those companies. Go ahead to the next slide. So I wanted to share this service area. We've had a couple changes in the project, so this I anticipate will change. The boundaries of this will change a little bit, but this is kind of the core service area around the Sea Line in North Minneapolis. So you see on the map there to the right, it's about 2 square miles. It has the goals that you saw previously, so expanding mobility choices. It's next to some of our high frequency lines. So you would, for example, be able to get off at a Sea Line station and request a microtransit trip to that cub along West Broadway, and it would be able to take you there. It might deviate a little bit and pick up 1 or 2 people along the way, but you would get more of a direct trip than if you were transferring, say, on the 14. Go ahead to the next slide. Some microtransit features just to call out, again, on how it differs both from paratransit and from our fixed route service. It is on demand, so it's real-time booking. So you book the trip when you need it. You'll get an estimated arrival time when you book. You'll be able to see the live tracking of the vehicle on your mobile app, or get, verbal cues on where it is located. You have the ability to specify travel needs. So whether you need a wheelchair accessible vehicle, and then you'll be able to do contactless payment. So we are going to run the service with a fare box like you see on our traditional buses. So we will have that option. You will also have an option of using a mobile ticket on these services. So go ahead to the next slide. And this is really where I want to open it up for discussion. We want to make sure that microtransit works for all users. You see in the picture there to the right, that's an example of a smaller profile vehicle that LA Metro is using. So it's more of a traditional van that has accommodations for wheelchair users. So type of vehicle that can be used is something that's flexible. In this first pilot, due to budget constraints, we are going to be using retired Metro mobility vehicles, most likely. So you'll be very familiar with the format of those vehicles, but that could change, in a couple of years down the road, depending on the performance of how this pilot looks. Some other things that we can make adjustments on, or I'd love to get feedback, is spatial coverage. So there's a challenge with balancing your wait times with coverage for an area. So trying to keep trips or your waiting time once you call a vehicle to about 10 minutes. It can be a challenge depending on how large the service area is. And typically to optimize those wait times, it'll ask you to travel a block or 2. So whether you're in a wheelchair using a walking assisted device, or you're just walking to meet the vehicle at a particular location. And then the second is your type of service design. So we can go point to point with this type of service, which is most likely what we're going to be doing with this first pilot, which means the vehicle can pick you up pretty closely to where you request the trip. Or we can designate a central point like a train station and say, your trip has to begin or end. You have to be transferring to and from transit. This is not going to be the case most likely with this first pilot. We are going to open it up to all types of trips within the service area. And then the last one is our user interface. So as you can imagine, because these are technology providers that are outside the government, these are private companies, the user interface is going to be a mobile app from a different company. So it's not going to be a Metrotransit branded app. It's actually going to be a company like Transloc as an example, or VIA is another example of a microtransit provider, and you would be downloading their app. Well, when it comes to web content and accessibility guidelines, there's some industry standards, but are those sufficient? I guess is one of the questions. We're in the process of developing RFPs over the summer, so this is a good time to weigh in on what some of those concerns might be. And with that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Meredith. I have a bunch of questions. I will start with 2 quick ones, and then I will allow TAC members to ask questions before I come back to maybe some more weedy questions that I have for you.
I have questions too, Chair.
Sounds good. I would imagine that we have a lot of folks who want to chime in here because accessible on-demand service is something that has been a long time coming. I'll just leave it at that. So the percentage of vehicles in this pilot that will be accessible, do you have a percentage on that yet?
It'll be 100%.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Then that totally eliminates
I missed that.
all of the vehicles used in this pilot project will be wheelchair accessible. That is what Meredith just said.
They better be.
And that eliminates the need for my next question, which was discrepancy in timing for accessible vehicles versus non-accessible vehicles. So I will not ask that second question. I saw, John, you had a finger up, and then we'll go to Darrell, and then Claudia, and then I can't remember more than 3 people, so I'll deal with the rest of you afterwards.
Good. I want to thank you. This is a very exciting concept to me, and trying to get you up here. You see, in fact, it's so exciting. I want you to go on to the next person, and I'll regroup.
Sure.
All right, Darrell.
Yeah, Meredith, I am so excited about this project. I just think right now the on-demand service for transit on demand is such a need in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities particularly. However, I wonder, is this going to be a pilot for 2 years? And it's similar to when we worked out a pilot project with airport taxi. Okay, before we required city, local municipality, local taxi cab companies to be fully accessible and to accommodate customers with a wide range of disabilities, we allowed them to do a pilot project, and that brought in 20 vehicles that were fully accessible, and they were supposed to be on-demand vehicles. What we found happening in that regard was that those individuals that needed a wheelchair accessible vehicle would often wait an hour to 2 hours before that vehicle came. So by that time, you've either missed your appointment time or your time to be at the event, or you're halfway through and you don't even know if you're gonna make it to your event by the time your pickup comes on the return. So how do we bridge that gap, and how do we make sure that if we do a project like this and we do see the on-demand service, and we're not deciding whether they go to whether they stop at a transit point or whether they hit a light rail point, if we're not making those parameters and we're doing it point by point, then how do we ensure the longevity of the program without really requiring really some creative forms of maybe advertising in order to keep those vehicles on the road and keep those vehicles operating to full capacity? That was a
Great
lot of
points.
questions. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I mean, Darrell, you bring up some points that are really at the heart of microtransit service, both kind of what the need is and what some of the challenges are. So I'll try to unpack it. The first thing I'm hearing in terms of the example you gave for time discrepancies within the airport pilot, time discrepancies for wheelchair accessible vehicles is something that we could write into the RFP requirements, but it's going to take some testing to see what exactly, how many vehicles out of the fleet do we need to be wheelchair accessible to provide equal service for people who are requesting a smaller vehicle that might not need a lift service, for example. So that's some of the ways we could address it in the future. For the purposes of this pilot, it won't impact it because all of the vehicles will be retired Metro Mobility buses. So it'll be 100% wheelchair accessible. But just kind of thinking to the future, this pilot is obviously of interest both for Metropolitan Transportation Services, so MTS, that runs the paratransit side, as well as Metro Transit. So we're looking at kind of all of those things. So it's good to bring up those points. In terms of ensuring the longevity of the program, it depends on what type of service you are piloting this as. The cost for paratransit nationally tends to be one of the highest, and that's the first way microtransit is typically tested. We are testing it in this urban environment, but obviously the trips are open up to everyone, including those folks who might be using paratransit for some of those trips. So that's something that we're just going to continue to track, and obviously track the budget of the project and how it's performing. But I will say, from what I've seen across the country, a lot of microtransit pilots, many agencies have been running them for a number of years. They do tend to, over time, save cost-wise. So that cover everything?
I think so, pretty much. I guess I more or less was looking at just remember this name, Open Doors. Okay, it's a Chicago concept. They do real time transit. And if you could mirror something like that, I would think we would be ahead of the game here in Minnesota.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. I'll go to Claudia, then Richard. And since I think there's going to be a lot of interest from TAAC members, I want to make sure to give each TAAC member at least one question before I still go back around to second questions, but I think we'll have time for that. So Claudia, take it away.
This sounds like a good project to have. I live on the north side of Minneapolis, and it almost looks like our transit link that I take. And so the question I have is, if you call and make that ride, will it be like, say, Cub on Broadway? Would it be at Cub itself, or will you be dropping us off at the transit center or the transit stop instead of the Cub itself? Or other places, or is it just the transit stops? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Claudia. Great question. So with a point-to-point style service, it will take you to your destination. Typically for pickup is where the driver or the software might, say you have to walk or roll a block or a block and a half away to meet the vehicle on more of a major arterial as opposed to a residential street. But the destination, ultimately, it would take you into the actual parking lot for an appropriate drop-off zone at those locations.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, thank you. I agree. It's a very, it sounds like a very exciting project. One question I have is, do you have an idea of what the cost for the rides will be? I maybe you mentioned, I didn't hear it. And also, what sort of outreach are you doing to populations that could particularly use this service?
Yes, great questions. For the cost, you know, we were getting ready to launch in October, actually, as a first mile, last mile service, so centered around stations, which tends to be a little less expensive than point to point. And so what we anticipated was the cost of a traditional transit trip. So any of your, if you have any discounts through any of our discount programs, those will be eligible to apply to the fare, and the same rules apply. So you would be able to do a free transfer. And that is just given the nature of the service area, because it was very small. You know, there's only so many trips, so we can definitely cover it for this first pilot. In the future, microtransit does tend to be more expensive to users, but just slightly over. I've seen pricing range across the country. I think the highest I've seen is about $5 for an all-day type of service. And I apologize, did you have a second question?
You're muted, Richard.
I was just asking about what sort of outreach you're doing to populations that might find this particularly useful. I'm thinking in part of the senior population.
Yes, since we've had to kind of change the contracting approach, we're in discussions for how to approach engagement. Actually, tomorrow, I have something on my calendar with our outreach staff. So this is a good time if you have recommended community members or institutions that we should reach out to that would be really interested. Now is the time to tell us to be sure to reach those folks. We are going to be doing some targeted outreach in that area of North Minneapolis, asking about what the boundaries for the service area should be. So, you know, what are the destinations that people want to get to in those locations?
Okay, I represent ARP, and I will mention it to ARP.
Great.
This is David. Do any other TAAC members who haven't chimed in yet? Anybody else like to chime in?
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Heidi.
All right, we'll go to Heidi and then John.
Okay, my question is, this is kind of the opposite because everyone's so happy. You make it sound so beautiful in the beginning with all the vehicles being 100% handicapped accessible, and I was thinking like Darrell and his wife and his kid, if they can all go together. My thing is, in the future, are you still going to have handicapped vehicles down the line? And are you going to have 100%? And how are you going to maintain them? Because if they come from Metro Mobility and the picture look like car vehicles, and I don't know if you're going to use the actual big buses, you know, when they get retired or whatever, because I was just on one that the lift was just rattling so bad that I had to turn off my hearing aid. And, you know, and so that's how bad it's getting with the older vehicles. So how can you keep me, if I was in that area, excited about this for the future? Because it sounds like you have everything kind of almost to 100% great now, but I don't know what the future holds. It could be a downer, you know, because you said right now you're 100%, but in the future we don't know. And $5 is not bad. I used to pay $5 to go one place to another in a taxi. Now it's way more. So that's not a bad deal. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's how I feel.
Absolutely, Heidi. It depends on who's running the service, and I can't look into a crystal ball and guess how both MTS and Metro Transit are going to decide to build out a program of microtransit. What I will say from some national examples is it's rare that the fleets are 100% wheelchair accessible vehicles. Most of the time they are a mix, and that's how the costs are kept lower. That's why I mentioned keeping the parameters, the performance parameters around time discrepancies for users would be a really important metric to include in the RFP to ensure that you know, everybody is receiving the same level of service.
Thank you. John, and then Darrell, I saw your hand.
This is because the devil is in the detail, and as bureaucracies develop, any bureaucracy, it will screw up. But I'm very excited because I think this has a way, perhaps, of cost management if done right, and it gets, it gets away from that charity model. I've been involved with my church in, Metro Mobility couldn't arrange their buses or their vans to allow for 10 a.m. services, and so that I couldn't get through to the people I was talking to, which represented all the churches in the metro area and Dakota County, that this charity, Christian charity, is neither, and it degrades people, and but on the other hand, non-tailored approaches end up burdening the taxpayer, and it's like there's frequent examples of this on Freakonomics radio that what one needs is a liberal program, or that broad and inclusive and equitable, just, but you need to be in terms of the individual stuff, you need to be really tailored, and I think I want to be on this committee and move any of these thoughts seen as a way to bridge the terrible divide between between kind of old-fashioned progressives and the danger of fascist these days. I know I said a lot there, but I'm really interested in working with you.
Sure, and it depends on how you, thanks for that comment, how you define charity. So obviously, this service is subsidized just like all of transit.
Well, it needs
cars
to
are
end.
subsidized.
Yeah,
we subsidize our roads. So,
I'm shutting up.
but these companies are viable and on the market. So they are part of the free market economy, the software providers we use. So there is market viability there. And
danger.
Sorry, what?
But viability, yeah.
So the transit agencies have seen a benefit in partnering with these companies. And when it comes to how tailored it will be and how large scale it will be in the future, I think that's to be determined. Metro Transit and MTS are very interested in this style of service, but it's going to take quite a bit to work out some of those kinks. It's not going to be perfect at launch. There'll be a big learning curve over the next year.
And how are you going to deal with the blowback when it's not perfect, both from the disability community and in terms of the broader public?
Yeah, I think we have to listen with open ears. This is very much a trial. So we are going to be doing some pretty robust engagement and feedback both throughout the project. So about 3 months in, we'll ask the users, how did everything about this service work? But also after the pilot, as we're thinking about how do we move forward on microtransit and plan for the future.
Thanks, John. Go ahead, Darrell.
As we're going forward and we're looking at building out this pilot project, I would look at the fact that I like the fact that you're using old retired Metro Mobility buses, because that gives me a little bit of capacity room, meaning that if I'm traveling with my wife, who's also in a wheelchair, we're using a single van ride. That means she cannot ride with me, I can't ride with her. So by using a bigger vehicle, you'll have the opportunity to allow for another passenger to come along, or a care provider, or even if, let's say, they stopped at a grocery store and they needed to pick up a few items, a few items along the way for dinner or whatever, they would have room to be able to do that. By putting them in a sedan or a smaller vehicle, that would eliminate the ability for me to travel with my wife and my daughter. So, or my PCA, meaning that I would have to either travel with him in a separate vehicle or call a separate vehicle for my wife, which means that we may not get there together, or we might not even be able to be there at the same time together based on capacities on the system. So how do you ensure that when I'm calling for a ride and I say, yes, I have a passenger with me who's also in a chair, how do you ensure that I'm going to get that bigger vehicle? Because I know, like, for instance, in Wisconsin, when you go to the Wisconsin Dells, you have to let them know ahead of time that you have 2 wheelchairs, so they can put that bigger vehicle on their system. If they don't have a need for that bigger vehicle, then that vehicle sits there and doesn't get used. So I'm a little concerned about that, meaning because at one time you say all the rides will be 100% ADA accessible, but yet then you say, oh, because of the constraints of the program or the timing of the program, we might be able to use a mixture of vehicles, or we might be able to use a mixture of fleet. If we start to use a mixture of fleet, then we're losing the true concept of being fully, completely accessible all the time throughout the service.
Yep, thank you, Darrell. And actually, if Christine is still on, Christine, can I ask how many
And that's what I was trying to say earlier to Darrell's question. That's Heidi.
Thanks, Heidi. How many wheelchair accessible seats are there in the Metro Mobility buses? Is it 2 or 3?
It depends on the fleet size. Sorry, this is Christine Cannon, Senior Manager, Metro Mobility. It depends on the fleet type, but a typical will have 3 spots.
Okay, thank you. So Darrell, I think when I took away 2 things from your question and comment. One is having the ability to increase the number of riders who are using a wheelchair in the software platform when you go to book the trip, to be able to differentiate, which is not something that I actually, in the software that I have seen, you can distinguish. You would have to call in. And the second is how to keep those at enough capacity that you're not having to book 2 vehicles. When it comes to the Metro Mobility vehicles, is that a sufficient amount of seats, 2 to 3 in those vehicles?
I personally, from my standpoint, and I've traveled quite a bit before the pandemic, not as much during the pandemic, but from my standpoint, I do think that you're going to get the retired vehicles from Metro Mobility, and they're probably going to be the I would assume they're going to be the three seaters or even the four seaters, because some of those bigger vehicles are the ones that rattle the most, and they don't have them in circulation as much. So those are the retired vehicles that I assume that you're going to get. So assuming that those rides aren't going to be as comfortable, you're going to have a lot of rattle, a lot of noise. So what I'm saying is, if we can figure out a way to make sure that when we're using those vehicles, that they're being used completely in the system, and they're not just being used when somebody calls and says, "Oh, I have 2 wheelchairs today, so we need to get this up and running," because you need to keep this vehicle out there, no matter if you're using it today or you're going to use it tomorrow. Because if you only put it out there when there's a need for it, then we're not going to continuing to incorporate fully accessible taxis into our transit system, because we're not going to have a need for it.
Yep, thank you for clarifying. And just to say, on the retired vehicles side, this is just for the pilot. This was for the purposes of testing, and it was just in order to keep most of the budget within operations so we can serve the most amount of time and the most amount of service area. And I don't think anyone is anticipating that those are what we would use for a full-fledged program. So, but that's great feedback.
This is David. John, I see your hand. We have to move on because we're over. But I'm gonna we can take this up.
10 seconds or 15 seconds. I want to be.
It's actually 10 to 15 seconds. Then yes.
I'm just backing up. It all sounds good, but I was on or I watched the commission about micromobility a couple of years ago, and how are we going to make sure that market forces, what regulations will keep this system from abusing taxpayers and people with disabilities?
Thank you, John.
Okay,
I wanted to just make one final comment on this topic, at the risk of going into the weeds and going down another rabbit hole. This is related to Darrell's question. Meredith, to what extent is this a coincidence, or have you been working alongside the city of Minneapolis, who they do have some proposed policy changes and new development to eliminate any requirement for parking? And while that is nice in our vision to move away from personal vehicles and everybody driving around and parking wherever they want, kind of moving away from our reliance on vehicles, I think a problem with that is it doesn't take into account people who have their own vehicles, accessible vehicles that they use to drive around and to park places. And those folks with disabilities might not be able to give up that option, give up the vehicle option as easily as the general public can. So I'm curious, is this just a coincidence because this accessible on-demand shared vehicles provides a way to potentially be a solution to that? Are these two things happening at the same time on purpose, or is Metro Transit moving forward with this without the knowledge that Minneapolis is planning on not allowing parking spots in new development?
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chair. I am aware of that policy. This pilot and interest in microtransit has been around for a very long time, so about 4 or 5 years that they've been trying to pilot something. So I will say we did coordinate with the city of Minneapolis on the service area. They were actually very interested in a similar style service you know, are over around Washington Avenue and in North Minneapolis. And so that was one of the reasons, you know, in addition to all the other factors, when we did the analysis of why we wanted to go in this particular location, we considered their interest and the feedback from the community that this type of service would really be needed. When it comes to implementation of the zoning for requirements for no parking spaces, I think that's going to be a very slow development and rollout in my experience. Banks don't change their finances for those major construction and capital projects. And they still tie those bank loans for some of the buildings that are rehabbed or constructed to the number of parking spaces associated. I think what would be needed is a robust plan to say, how do we convert traditional parking spaces into wheelchair accessible locations, or for some of those vehicles that you identify in particular. But the idea is to have a suite of services that people can use so they don't feel tied to just their personal vehicle if they don't want to use it.
Thank you. I realize that that kind of opens up the discussion further, but we are out of time for this. Meredith, thank you very much.
Yes,
Hopefully
thanks
the
so much
next
for the opportunity.
hopefully the next pilot project will be without drivers in these vehicles. All right. So Brooke, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me back. I wish I was here to give the final report on the outcome of the 2021 session. Unfortunately, there's really not much of substance to report on today. As you probably remember, the regular legislative session ended on May 17th. It ended without any budget bills being passed. On that last day of session, the legislative leaders and the administration did agree to some global budget targets for the major issue areas. However, all of the details about how each omnibus bill would meet that target are yet to be worked out. Those negotiations are still happening in work groups or between committee chairs. It's sort of a no man's land in that because the legislature is not in session, there are no official committees. The conference committees that were appointed expired, for lack of a better word, on May 17th. So it's been challenging to sort of track who's talking to who and what they're talking about. So the goal when the leaders agreed to these targets was that work groups would meet and have budget agreements, at least the numbers sorted out by May 28th. And then that would be followed by bill language on June 4th. We did not meet that May 28th goal of having budget agreements, and I don't think anyone is anticipating that bill language is going to be done on Friday, which is that June 4th goal. Specific to transportation, the big global targets that the leaders agreed to would allocate $200 million in the first biennium for transportation. So the Transportation Committee targets $200 million. Not much in the tails, so that's going to mean that primarily that $200 million is for one-time spending. And I would also just remind members that the Transportation Committee includes the Metropolitan Council, all of MnDOT, and then the Driver and Vehicle Services Division of the Department of Public Safety. So That's a lot of programs for $200 million to be up for grabs for. Logistics wise, the one date that is sort of certain on the calendar is that the legislature would need to be called back in for a special session on June 14th. If and when the governor extends the peacetime emergency. So that's sort of the new target for getting at least the bills drafted, and then the legislature could go in for special session on the 14th, and it probably would take more than a day to pass all these bills, but that would sort of be the timeline for bills to come together and then have that avenue to get those passed. Of course, the real hard deadline is when the current budget ends on June 30th. If there is no budget put in place that would begin on July 1st, then we'd be looking at a shutdown scenario. I hope that we can all agree that we don't want to go there, but July 1st is going to be coming up sooner than I think we're ready for. But so that's really to say that my report is that I don't really have a report, unfortunately, at this time. But I'm happy to make an attempt to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Brooke. I understand that. Yeah, politics sometimes can be messy. Darrell, go ahead.
Two things with the $200 million that everybody's fighting over in transit. What does that look like as far as there are pilot projects that we just spoke about before you came on, Brooke, and what I'm more concerned about is the invest dollars, and also the fact of trying to change the fare evasion policy to make sure that it is in accordance to a ticketable offense. It doesn't become a felony or a permanent issue on somebody's record just because they refused or they didn't pay or they couldn't pay a $2 fare. I mean, the fact that I know clients and I have friends and family that are being denied housing and they're being denied appropriate services based on the fact of they ran into some similar problems and forgot to pay a fare that they should have paid. I mean, so we know that this is out there. Obviously, that's why the chair was willing to get behind this policy and talk about it. I mean, I've had bus drivers refuse to simply take our fare because we've been disabled. Okay, but the other driver on the other end doesn't necessarily know that. So at that moment, then do I risk paying the fare again, trying to pay the fare again, or have that driver yell at me again? So a lot of times, I'll say, well, I paid, or I tried to pay and the driver refused my payment. So I mean, what do you do in those regards? I mean, we try to tell everybody that we have to pay our way, but then when we try to pay our way, we get told, "Oh, it's okay. You're good. Don't worry about it," or "It's fine." And I don't know how you convince people with disabilities to say yes, you got to get up to the plate and pay your fair share, but yet all the drivers and everybody else says, "Oh, it's okay. We ain't got time for it. You're good. Can't reach the football. Don't worry about it." So I'm just trying to figure out how do we go lockstep and in step with the policies of the transportation committees or even Metro Transit or Met Council, but yet the drivers on the other end are not getting that same message. They're getting told that they can run their ships the way they want, and they clearly do that.
Sure. Well, I can speak to the legislative proposal that we put forward this year, and actually in previous years as well, more than the operational side of that.
Right.
But the proposal to allow the council to set up an administrative citation program for fare enforcement is still in the mix. You know, the more people supporting that, the better. Darrell, as you noted, the chair has really been pushing this as an important priority for the council, and it still is. So we're hoping that in these final negotiations, that we can find a way to get something that will work for everyone to get through, because it's better operationally for the council to have this authority to set up this program. And then, you know, as you mentioned, because it is a criminal citation, there are collateral consequences that come with having this be a misdemeanor that maybe nobody intended, and nobody would really see that as fair or equitable. So that is still in the mix, and we are still really pushing that with the House and Senate. And then because you mentioned the financial side, I'll just note that you know, we're really trying to hold firm on not accepting any cuts to our base general fund appropriation. So that's, you know, another huge priority on the side of the administration as they work out the budget.
Thank you, Brooke.
This is Heidi. Can I speak, Chair?
Go ahead, Heidi.
My concern is, and Darrell's right about what he proposed, but I'm also concerned about the people. If you make it too light, and I don't know how the legislators work on this, because I've seen every time I'm on the bus, or especially down in the city, because I live in the suburb of West St. Paul, so I don't see it as much, but I see it down in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and when I span out more, that there are people who, and I don't know why certain communities want to cheat the system, and it's not everybody in that community, but we have to figure out a way that if we lighten it, then they'll cheat it even more, when I know they can pay it, because I look at the way they're dressed, I look at the way they're carrying their stuff. I don't know what it is about certain groups of
Heidi,
people that just want to.
Heidi,
So I just wanted to bring it up so it gets talked about, because Darrell's right, but at the same time, we still got to put something in place, because I don't want it to come back to the taxpayers or Metro Mobility, or they have to raise the price because they're not making enough. We got to come up with something. If the legislators can come up with something, that would be great. That could work, or the Met Council, if they can work together as a team. I just wanted to bring it up because it needs to be talked about. Thank you.
This is David. Brooke, just one second. We're not going to engage in a discussion that involves stereotypes. So I appreciate your concern, Heidi. But Brooke, if you want to address Heidi's question, you can, but you don't need to.
Well, just in terms of what is actually in the proposal, it would require the council to set up the framework of the program, and that would be done through a public process. And part of that process would identify what is the appropriate fee structure, whether that would be graduated in terms of first, second, third offense, but giving the council the authority to set up the program allows for a discussion of what an appropriate administrative citation system would look like.
Thank you, Brooke. Are there any other comments from committee members? All right, thank you, Brooke. Good luck at the Capitol. Chris, do you have a Green Line update for us? Are you still on, Chris? I think it
Yeah,
looks like
I'm still. I'm sorry, Dave. Nothing this month.
Okay. Darrell, I know there was an update included in the June email for Rush Line and Gold Line. Did you have anything you want to add to that?
On the rush line, I did. You guys did get that sent to you in your email. The one thing I will say about that, we're getting tens of dozens of responses relating to the rush line and their environmental phase completion that they completed. And that is open. The public comment period is open till June 25th. So please, if you have any comments about BRT and the rush line particularly, as it runs north and south, it goes to Woodbury. You know, we can talk about it as a group, or we can take it offline and talk about it.
Well, what's that date again? Daryl?
Say that again.
What's that date again? You said the 25th or something.
Yep, the date of all public comments have to be submitted to the feds by June 25th.
Okay, thank you.
So it was by state statute or federal statute, it's a 45-day comment period, I believe. Is that Chair, is that a federal statute, that 45-day public comment period, or is that a policy statute?
You're getting way too much in the weeds for my knowledge.
All right.
I don't actually know. I'm sure there's a requirement. If it's 45 days, I'm sure that they're just doing what they have to do to abide by their own rules.
Yep. So it's probably a federal requirement, a federal comment period.
Fantastic. Thank you, Darrell, for that. So we have something that's relatively new to our agenda. We don't need an update right now, but since it's on the agenda, I want to give the members of the work group or a Metro Transit staff member who serves on that work group as well. The bus priority seating work group that we put together a few months ago. And if nobody wants to chime in, that's quite all right. I just want to at least give the opportunity to folks.
Yes, Chair. I'll give time for anybody else to make comments that's on that committee. But I will say, from the time that I've been watching that committee has done tremendous work, and they are about ready to put, I believe, about 3 or 4 different scenarios, different PSAs,
nice,
online, and they're about to test them a little bit. So I mean, we're close to doing some really phenomenal work that I believe we've been waiting for this for a long time in the communication division of Metro Transit. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it. I mean, everybody that serves on the committee is very active and very participatory. So I think some of our commercials, some of the public service announcements are going to be a little cheeky and cheesy, but I think we're going to get our point across, and it's going to be fun. And when I say fun, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of enthusiasm from Metro Transit in a long time. So
if you're developing the ads, they will be fun.
So to see them be excited about this is really, I mean, it really is eye-opening, and it really says that they really want to bring a new direction to Metro Transit and make transit available for everybody.
Fantastic. That is a good update, and I'm quite excited now to see your cheeky video appearance or somebody else's video.
I don't know about being there, but I mean, you can say that I've had input in making sure that those get out there. So
We'll use our influence to make sure you do.
Sounds good. All right, so I have just a relatively quick report. It's less of a report and more of a question to all of you. So traditionally, we don't have a July meeting because it tends to butt up against the 4th of July. This year, that's not as much the case. So I did want to pose the option to committee members to have a July meeting. We have been getting a lot of requests to get on our agenda. So having one more agenda, one more meeting, it in 2021 could help us do more work. But that being said, the illustrious Allison Coleman, who takes care of essentially staffing this meeting, takes her vacation around this time, and I would not want us to either cut her vacation short or burden her in any way. So if we did decide to have a July meeting, then we would most likely be operating without Allison and looking for a potential another staff replacement from Metrotransit, which would be interesting to find, since I just learned that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but in multiple decades of your service, you have missed, I think you said, one meeting.
Yes. Yes,
which is amazing.
I mean,
and I wouldn't want to ruin that record. But I did want it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make the decision just by myself. So, we can have a short discussion, or we can just take a vote, or y'all can just say heck no or heck yes, and I'll go with that.
I have a question. Do
Go
you
ahead.
think we need to have a backup person just in case she, I don't know if she'll get sick or if something happens. She only missed one. That's really good in all these years. But have you ever thought about having a backup person? If she has to leave all of a sudden for some reason, we have a filler in her that can take over and understand how this works until they find a permanent one.
I'm that's actually a really good idea, and I have thought about that, but I don't think we've had to ever address it since of the stellar attendance rate that we've gotten from Allison over the years.
I know, but this is something that never really gets talked about, and then when it does happen, we're scrambling for the real help we truly need.
Heidi, it's a fantastic question, but it's not exactly what we're discussing right now. We're discussing more the immediate question: do we want to have a July meeting?
Actually, I feel strongly.
Hold on, John. Hold on. Let me finish. Do we want to have a July meeting? And if we do, we will. I will make sure that we have someone to staff our meeting.
Okay, and then in the future, can we talk about my question that I brought up? Because it gets to the point where we build a system. We do this in the disability community too.
Heidi,
we build it so
it's already in the works. I'm only cutting you off because we're short on time. But yes, Heidi, that's a fantastic point, and it's already in the works.
I just want to make sure, because I want to have this going on for the near future, no matter who runs it in the correct way. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'm looking for less of a
I would say yes.
I'm looking for less of a discussion, more of an opinion on yes or no, we should have it.
I strongly feel I like the smaller, I like the smaller group in that there's more interaction. So even if we don't get a form, there's wonderful people here that I respect, and we're also keeping up with the people that we should be. And it's Zoom, so.
John, in the course of time, and Chair, I'm sorry about cutting you all off, but I'm going to make a motion that we do cancel our July meeting in the form that that Allison does normally take her vacation at the time, with the understanding that typically that is only our meeting that we only cancel. But I think last year we canceled a December meeting as well, and I'm a little bit hesitant to cancel 2 meetings, and so if we understand going forward, If we cancel July's meeting, then we need to keep all the other meetings on track.
Yes, Darrell, that is correct. We did, I think, have 4 cancellations last year. So
because of the pandemic, I would assume.
So there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Darrell's motion was to cancel the July meeting.
David, do you think that we should get together in July?
I've already given you all the information that I wanted to give you.
Right.
Dan, this is Chris Bates. I'll second Darrell's motion to cancel July.
All right, so we have a motion, a second. Is there any discussion on the motion before we vote?
I'm okay. I'm basically a lazy person, so I'm fine. Anyway.
All right, so seeing no discussion, I'll go into roll call. Diane? So a yes vote, I'm sorry, I'll clarify. So a yes vote would signify that you want to cancel next month's or July's meeting. Well, Diane took off. Never mind. She doesn't get to be the first person to vote. All right, Eric.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Claudia.
Yes.
Patty.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, Patty Thorson. Sorry, Patty Thorson.
Yes.
Yes. Cancel.
Yes.
Darrell.
Aye.
Carrie.
Aye.
Richard.
I'll go with the crowd, yes.
Go with your heart, not the crowd. Jeff. Is Jeff still on? Did Jeff pop off? Chris?
Aye.
Heidi?
Yes.
And Patsy Murphy? No?
David, this is Jeff. I vote yes.
Okay, Jeff votes yes. And this is one of the amazing phenomenons of not having a secret ballot. People just tend to go with the flow. And myself, I vote no, but it doesn't matter because we have an overwhelming support of the motion, which passes. So there will be no July meeting, which is in line with what we've done over the past many years. With that said, let's finish up the. Well, I have just a couple minutes for public comment. Is there anybody from the public who would like to make a comment?
Yes, please, Chair. Andy Strusik here. You hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All righty. Just a couple quick Metro mobility things that are new as of today. This morning, some of you, if you're on our listserv, might have gotten an email indicating that starting tomorrow and through the summer, every Thursday from 5 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Nicollet Mall is going to be totally shut down for all vehicles, including ours, for the farmers market. It's kind of been a soft close in years past where we've been able to get on there if a customer requested it. It's a hard close this year. So we won't be able to access the mall. We're doing outdoor drops at the cross streets if people need to go to the mall on Thursdays during those times. And as most of you might know, we do tend to try to drop at cross streets anyway on the mall. So it shouldn't be too much of a change. And then the second thing I just wanted to give people a heads up on, as of this morning, the MTS director did decide that Metro Mobility is going to start following suit this week with Microtransit and do away with the 6 feet of physical distancing on buses. So this week, all changes
I don't
around
like that.
physical distancing will be off of the website and no longer in practice.
Hey, can you repeat that again? I kind of lost you. That last thing you just said.
As of this week, no more physical distancing on Metro Mobility buses, just like there isn't any on fixed route public transit.
Hold on. Please wait. So as the agenda works, member comment and public comment is not a time for discussion. Those are agenda items. This is something that happened, I think, Andy, you said like today. So I want to thank you for letting us know that. From what it already seems like we're having a little bit of unease with this. But given that this is brand new information and Andy's not the person who makes the decision here.
Yeah, I wasn't going to hold him accountable.
He's delivering the information to us.
Chair, if I may add, I think I would really like to receive the community's feedback around this. I think it's an important thing to move up. So please do either email or call the service center with any opinions on physical distancing and what you'd like to see. That's where things sit as of right now.
So in short, the social distancing on Metromobility buses as of today, is that correct, Andy, has been eliminated? It's system-wide, it's on LRT, it's on fixed route, it's on buses, it's on BRT, and it's on Metromobility, is that correct?
Yes, we are in the process of pulling stuff down off the website and off of our communications, and then once it's down today, that will be a go.
Thank you, Andy.
So do we still have to wear the mask?
The federal mask requirements for public transit are still in place under federal rule.
And so it's kind of timely that we now have member comment. We are already over time, so people have to leave, including Met Council and Metro Transit staff. By all means, you all have other obligations to attend to. That applies to TAAC members as well. But I do want to give members a chance to comment. Again, this is not a discussion. You can say your piece about whatever you want, but there might not be a response. So I saw Darrell's hand. Go ahead, Darrell.
Chair, I just have a quick question. If Andy's still on there, I know he doesn't have to respond if he doesn't want to. But one question was, are they still allowing on Metromobility for the driver to stay with you, or are they doing away with that stay with you requirement? Do you understand what I'm saying? Or
The driver to stay with you.
should I take it off? Should I take it offline? Yeah.
I'm not understanding the question. The driver to stay with you.
When you go for your med appointment or
curbside. I get
it.
Yep, we're leaving curbside in place for now and are trying to move towards keeping that, if we can, post-pandemic on at least a pilot basis.
Gotcha. Thank you. Who do we talk to make sure that stays in place even after the pandemic ends?
Same deal. Pass that along to the service center.
Okay, so is that you and Christine and all those guys, or what?
Yep, either email at Metromobility at metc.state.mn.us, or you can call the 1111 number.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other members who want to make comments about anything in particular?
Yeah, I got the email saying that I can be on the committee that I was asked to be on last month. Just wanted to bring that to your guys' attention. That is the email to, for like advertising and looking at the stuff. So I have to respond. So I just wanted to tell you that the word is out that we are in the process of setting up a date.
Thank you, Heidi.
I wanted to tell you that.
Thank you, Heidi. Any other members want to comment? Richard, go
Richard,
ahead.
I just saw a headline come across during the meeting that the Biden administration allocated $239 million to Minnesota projects, including $100 million for the Gold Line.
Yes.
Wow.
Fantastic, Richard. Do any members have comments? All right.
Thank you, Richard, for grabbing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a good development. All right. Well, seeing no other member comments, that was a very productive meeting. We had a lot of information, a great discussion, and we will not see you in July, but stay tuned for August. We already have a full agenda for August. Have a great majority of your summer before August.
And Allison, have a great vacation.
We will not ruin your.
I know I was out drinking her under the table the night before she missed.
Be safe, everyone.
Bye-bye.